I'm really curious to kind of go back in time and hear, when did you first know you wanted to be a mom? I read in your book that when you were little, you would play or dream about breastfeeding and middle of the night feeding. So it sounds like this was a very early dream for you.
Yeah, for sure. And in my 20s, a lot of that dream was realized by just buying new pets or adopting new pets. But I was pretty confident that I wasn't going to even try to attempt having a child by myself. So I waited, for the right person to have children with. And for me, that was my wonderful husband, David, who I've been with for 15 years now. And yeah, I knew when I met him. Actually, I knew when I met his dad
I remember reading this.
that I wanted Dave to be my husband and my baby daddy.
So how soon did you two start thinking about trying, or how soon did you start trying?
We started trying pretty immediately because I got married when I was 36. As a woman, they tell you you're born with all the eggs you're ever going to have, like pretty much at the first gynecological exam. They're like, well, you better start thinking about this.
Do you know that my my mother-in-law, the first time I met her, told me that exact line? I was like, thank you. That is not helpful
great.
at all.
Great. Love it. We started pretty soon after we got married. And I got pregnant right away after we pulled the goalie. I had an IUD, so we pulled the goalie. That's what I say. And I got pregnant right away, and then we miscarried.
What was that experience like? Were you prepared for the possibility of a miscarriage? Was it shocking to you? What were you going through?
I mean, I don't think I was prepared for it, but, the way it was explained to me was that if there is something that your body cannot produce or is lacking in order to have this particular baby, that the pregnancy, will take care of itself. And so, my whole thought was, okay, well, there was something wrong, and it wasn't the right time. And the interesting thing is that with my daughter, I also miscarried before my daughter. So at that point, I was kind of just aware that this is maybe how my body does it.
Sure. So after you miscarried before having Milo, did you feel ready to start trying right away? Some people are like, oh, I had a taste of it and now I'm even more ready than I was before. Some people feel like they have to wait. Where was your head at?
No, I mean, I was ready to try again as soon as they gave me the okay. It just felt like it was a bummer. I know that a lot of women take miscarriages very hard, but for me, it was part of the process, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It was part of the process, and both miscarriages were, I think I was maybe 7 or 8 weeks pregnant. So, if it wasn't viable, my body did what it was supposed to do, and so I still look at it like that.
It seems like a very healthy way of looking at it. I had read somewhere, and if you're comfortable talking about this, I would love to ask about it, that you had thought in the moment, like, this is punishment for abortions that I've had. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely had this moment of, well, I'm being punished basically for abortions in my 20s. And it took me, I didn't realize that at the time. It took a while in therapy to realize that was something that I was putting on myself.
You've been really open about talking about that part of your history, and I think it's really helpful for women, especially now that this is very much a topic of conversation and our rights are very much in jeopardy. But I think a lot of women, some of my friends included, feel like, oh, if I tell people I had an abortion, they think that means, oh, I never wanted to be a mom. So I think it's really helpful to hear moms, people who always wanted to be moms, talk about, it just wasn't the time for me, or there were other reasons why I didn't want to have this child.
Oh, for sure. And I think it's important that we continue to talk about it. I think for me personally, and obviously these are such personal decisions, but my inability to not be a selfish 20-year-old was reason enough. But then there was a lot that I wanted to do before I had children. And the point is that, I was given a choice to control my life and to control my own destiny. 1 in 4 women, I think, have had an abortion. So, yep. I mean, for the women that are listening to this who don't want to discuss it, I mean, you should just know that you are not alone in that decision that you made.
And that it doesn't have to make the decision about a future path to motherhood either.
The fact that there's a whole generation of young women who are coming into their sexuality who are, happens. Mistakes happen. Things happen. And the fact that they cannot control their own destiny and their own futures is, I mean, it feeds right into the patriarchy and what they're trying to do.
So I want to get back to Milo's timeline. So tell me about when you found out you were pregnant with him.
When I found out I was pregnant with Milo, my husband and I were in Hawaii. And it was, I want to say New Year's Eve. And we were just ecstatic. And then it became, do we call home? Do we wait till we get home? I think we called home.
So did you have to go out and buy a pregnancy test in Hawaii?
Yes. Well, I sent my husband in.
And so because you had had a miscarriage prior to this, were you able to feel celebratory right away? Was it nerve-wracking going in for that first scan? What were the emotions that you were experiencing early on in the pregnancy?
I think, I was probably a little scared that I would miscarry again, especially being the age that I was. But, then you go in and your doctor tells you everything looks good and it's impossible not to fall in love. I just loved being pregnant. There's just this realization of how incredibly perfect of a machine birthing women's bodies are. And how spectacular it is to feel those changes and then to start to feel, a baby kick and then to realize that they did the same things inside your body that they do. My kids used to do this little cricket thing with their little feet and it used to tickle me up in my ribs. And that's how they fall asleep. Both of them, they do this little cricket thing with their feet. With Milo, it was so beautiful because I wasn't working when I was pregnant. So I was able to take, yoga classes and have a nap in the afternoon. It was a little different with Bella because we were shooting Project Runway All-Stars in New York. So not only was we wrapped 10 days before I gave birth to her. So not only was I super pregnant, but I was also in stilettos and, just the best fashion you could possibly imagine. But I was enormous.
That's so funny.
But
I don't think I wore heels once in my third trimester. Yeah. That sounds like torture to me.
Oh, when I got home, because we shot in New York, when I got home and it was right before I was giving birth to Bella, I mean, I couldn't put on shoes.
Yeah. My husband was tying my shoes at the end.
But not only that, my feet were so bloated. This idea, which I adopted during my pregnancies, of my body is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. My body knows what it's doing, just let go, was incredibly profound, really, to have that realization.
So how did that idea of my body knows what to do carry over into your birth preferences? I think at one point you phrased it, maybe it was in your book, as vaginal birth or bust. So tell me a little bit about what those preferences were and how you envisioned the birth.
Well, I think when you go through all of those classes, it's a lot of classes that you go through as far as, how to breathe, how to breastfeed, how to this, how to that. And David and I did all of them. But I realized like there was or is an expectation of the way in which you're supposed to give birth to a baby. And so I felt that I needed to do it the way, they were naturally telling me it was done.
Meaning no intervention.
Yeah, just go to the hospital and have a baby.
Were you thinking like no Pitocin, no epidural?
Yes. I mean, that was my birth plan, which I never kept, which I wish I kept, but I had it all written down. And my husband knew the birth plan, and he felt like it was his responsibility to, I always say he was like a football coach. He was like, come on, let's go, let's do this. He feels bad still to this day that he pushed so hard for me to not have an epidural and do all of those things that would have made life so much more comfortable. But then, of course, after 18 hours of labor and 3.5 hours of pushing, my OBGYN, she's like, I could have told you this was going to happen.
Wow. What did you think when the doctor said that?
Well, I was in another world, but apparently everyone around me, my husband, my mother, they were like, well, why didn't you? Why put her through this? And she said because she wanted to give birth naturally. But his head was 13 centimeters. There was no way he was coming out. And so vaginally.
So tell me about those 18 hours plus 3.5 hours. Like your mom's there, your husband is there. What were all the stages of emotions you going into it? I imagine you were excited. Do you feel scared or nervous?
No, I wasn't I mean, what happened was I had a slow leak. So they had to induce with Pitocin. And as soon as they hooked up the fetal monitor and I could hear Milo's heartbeat, that's the only thing I focused on. I was like, you know what? This is what I am here to do, and let's do it. And I was more so then, but I'm very type A as far as I like things to go as planned.
Yep.
Because that's why you plan. As soon as my water broke and it was like this slow trickle, I knew pretty quickly that it wasn't going to go as planned. So, I held off as long as I could on an epidural, but I got at 7 centimeters when I thought I was going to die. I got the epidural.
So I want to backtrack because I loved this part of your book where you talked about all of the planning and like you had a digital frame with photos of your dogs and you had the music all planned out. And I think the line is, I didn't need an epidural, I had gin and juice. So talk about like all of that planning and like what was in your hospital bag? Because this does not sound like your basics in the hospital bag.
Well, everyone tells you what they think you should bring. So instead of like deciding which part of what they were saying would fit into who I was, I just brought everything because I was like, okay, you know what? Someone told me I should bring a digital frame with pictures of the kids. I mean, of the dogs, the kids at the time, my fur kids, of the dogs and the family. And that'll be a great focal point. And I mean, it was like a trunk for sure. And then I couldn't understand the whole concept of staying in a hospital gown. So I wound up bringing clothes. I brought more pairs of socks because everyone kept telling me how cold your feet get. And lip balm. I had every kind of lip balm with me just in case, I had this kind in case the smell of this kind was making me nauseous, or maybe the baby didn't want to smell this on my lips, and maybe I'll just use, Aquaphor. I mean, it was like a trunk. It was a trunk. We made all of these playlists to, to just be where I needed to be emotionally at that moment.
Do you remember anything besides gin and juice that was on the playlist?
I don't, but I do have this awesome video of my best friend and Dave, and I revisited all of this while writing the book, but my best friend Allah, who is actually in the room for Bella, and Dave doing some hip hop dancing, and then my mother carrying a thing of ice cubes, like comes on the screen and just kind of like,
Oh my God.
so adorable. So I cherish, those moments, obviously, but
That's amazing. Okay, so
yeah.
your OBGYN says
I
it's
could have told you
C-section
this was
time.
going to
Yeah, I
happen.
could have told you this was going to happen. So did you feel relief or disappointment that this was going to be the way that you gave birth?
I don't know that I was that aware that I'm able to really tell you an honest emotion of how I felt then. I was just, after pushing for 3.5 hours and, the things that they don't tell you about that, which I talk about in my book, is that they're really invasive. You're just ready to be past this part of this. like do it, like I'm ready to move past this 18 hours of this.
Invasive is such a good word for it. I certainly was not prepared for how invasive it was. And there was one line that stood out to me where you said everybody has access to your vagina when you're having a baby.
Yeah.
And
Like I thought they were going to start like backing cars into it at one point.
Yeah.
It's like, what are all these tools? Why do you have so many
torture
tools?
devices. Yeah. So labor is vulnerable for a lot of women, but you've talked about how childbirth can be particularly traumatizing for victims of sexual assault and abuse. So can you tell me a little bit about how that kind of brought up that experience and how you dealt with that?
Well, I remembered at one point really not enjoying the fact that lots of people had access to my vagina. And thinking to myself, why does, I don't like this. And why does it feel so familiar? I've never had a baby before. Why does this invasive feeling feel so familiar? And that was just a fleeting moment, a tick in time, but I didn't forget about it. And so I had postpartum anxiety and depression after Milo. And so after, going through therapy after giving birth to Milo and remembering that one moment of feeling like I was being held down and had things being done to me that I didn't want, to me was very reminiscent of being sexually assaulted. And so it triggered like all of these memories that I thought I had dealt with, and I think anyone who has dealt with trauma has the like moments where you're like, yeah, I'm fine, I've dealt with that, versus the moments where you go, oh, no, I didn't. I just tried to tuck it away so no one could see them or I couldn't see them or feel them anymore. And I don't think it's something that a lot of, I had never heard of a woman describing childbirth like that invasive feeling of being assaulted, but that's what it felt like for me. I got to think that because it felt that way for me, it must have felt that way for other women. And so, and I wonder how much of my postpartum anxiety was due to, of course, hormones and all of the things, but also that feeling that felt like I wasn't in control. I think the lesson we all learn as moms, and we learn it pretty quickly, is that there's nothing you can control in parenthood.
Yeah.
It's the most runaway train feeling, and it's bizarre because it's that coupled with such intense, beautiful love. It's just miraculous that any mother would just not have some sort of postpartum or anxiety about parenthood. I am so convinced that that every mother goes through some type of this, whether it be depression or anxiety, this romantic idea of childbirth and having a child where it's like the moms look perfect and they're on the white sheets and the baby's latching on so perfectly, and it's just not like that. It's just not.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, but it's also terrifying. And so, and I think we would be better to say that out loud.
So tell me about when Milo comes into this world. Do they hand him to you away?
They put him on my chest because I had a C-section after all of that. They put him on my chest, and he started, little cutie, he started like trying to find my nipple, but ended up on my nose.
No.
So I have all these pictures of like him just being born and him suckling on my nose, trying to get.
Isn't that wild that seconds old, and they know to do that?
It's insane.
Talk about your body knowing what to do.
Yeah, it's insane. And just the fact that your nipples go dark because they can't see, like they see contrast better. It's just, we are perfect machines.
It's a miracle, all of the things that happen.
It's a miracle.
After you have Milo, you have postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression. You mentioned that you had a miscarriage in between your son and your daughter.
Yeah, right before my pregnancy with my daughter. So it would have been two years. Milo was 2.
And did you feel, I don't know what the word is, more prepared for that miscarriage? Did it feel different once you had a child?
Yeah, I think so. The doctor that delivered Bella, he said, sometimes this is how women's bodies prepare for a pregnancy, knowing that I got pregnant again. But at this point, I was 40. So we probably should have froze eggs when I had 38-year-old eggs. And we just never did. We just never got around to it because then all of a sudden we were parents. So we, conceived naturally, and I was obviously a high-risk pregnancy. By the time I had Bella, I was 41. With Bella, I wasn't supposed to labor at all because we had a planned C-section, but she decided to come 5 weeks early. And my husband didn't believe I was in labor because she was 5 weeks early. So I labored for 6 hours before going to the hospital. And then this was a different doctor. He was like, well, let's see if if your contractions go away, because it could be Braxton Hicks. And I was like, but I've been having these contractions since 4:00. It's now 10 p.m.
So you knew that it was happening.
I knew at 4:00.
Yeah.
Because I had Braxton Hicks contractions my entire pregnancy from maybe 5 months on, and I knew that this felt different. And so my parents were in Italy because she was 5 weeks early. So we thought 10 days in Italy is fine. You'll have plenty of time to get back. Nope. So my best friend Ala, who was the one who was doing 90s dances with Dave when Milo was born, I made him come into the room with us. And he had convinced the anesthesiologist that I was their surrogate.
Oh my God.
Because this is why he's my best friend, because he's hysterically funny. And my doctor played along with it. So, I mean, we just had a grand old
quite a different experience.
But here is the best part is that Dr. Fenmore, my doctor, whom I love so much, said to me, I think we're gonna take her. The question is, are we gonna go now? It was like 11:30 at night, or should we wait until after midnight? And Allah looked up whose birthdays were on the 3rd and the 4th, and he was like, Beyonce's birthday is on the 4th. Wait until after midnight.
Stop it.
I swear to God. So that's how Bella we picked her birthday. We had a choice between September 3rd and 4th. And because Beyonce's birthday was the 4th, Allah's like, yep, we're in the 4th.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
I love that. And I've heard from people who have a second C-section that the second one is very, very different. Did you find it to be different?
I mean, that it's all just hard. So I don't think I remember it being harder. I mean, it's just all hard. They're literally cutting you open and taking a baby out. It's like there is no easy way to do that.
And you've talked about how even though this was not part of your preferences or your plan, that you really grew to love your C-section scar. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, because I mean, how many people can say this is where they cut me open, removed all of the organs in the way, got my baby out, gave me my baby, put all of the organs back in, and then stitched me and stapled me up. I mean, it's like there's something incredibly tribal about it almost. It feels like a almost like a tattoo in a way.
And tell me about when you saw Bella for the first moment and you held her.
Oh my gosh. Well, she looked just like what I thought Milo was going to look like. Because, well, Milo came out with no hair and blue eyes. And I was like, whose baby is this? Because my husband and I are both Italian. We're both dark.
Yeah.
And Bella came out with this thick, beautiful, wavy black hair and these big eyes that looked brown, but they actually wound up turning really, really green.
And tell me about when you introduced the two of them. Did Milo feel like this is my baby?
Well, I put her in her bassinet in the hospital, so he didn't, that wasn't the first image, was his mommy holding another baby. So
interesting.
He could discover her on his own. And he just kept saying, because he had just turned 3, so he kept saying, she came out? She came out, Mama? Baby Bella came out of your belly? Oh, and it's just so sweet.
It makes me want to cry.
Yeah. He would stop and he'd put his little hand on her cheek and he'd put her pacifier in her mouth. Those two, so sweet, so sweet. Which made, I still had postpartum anxiety, but it was very different. It was, first of all, I had a team of people helping me through it this time. And second of all, I knew that medication worked for me. And so if I needed to go on an antidepressant, there was no shame in that whatsoever. And so it was a lot more enjoyable.
I'm curious what advice you would give to a woman who is going into labor and delivery, into her birth plan, and wants to do it without intervention like you did. What would you say to someone now that you have been through it?
Oh, I think every woman is on their own birthing journey. I just know that for me, the more I dug my heels into wanting things done a certain way, it made adapting to things being done differently harder. And that is maybe the first lesson that a child will teach you. Whatever you think and whatever you plan for, that you have to be adaptable. And be able to go with the flow and ride the wave. Because parenthood is definitely, a wave.
Thank you for being so generous with your time and sharing all of this.
Thank
and
you
being
so
so
much.
open. I'm so glad that all of our listeners can hear your story. I think it's really important.